Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to Strategies for Facilitating Successful Asynchronous Discussions. On behalf of Ocean County College in New Jersey, I'm excited to be here today. I hope that you find value in the pedagogical strategies that I provide and that you interact with each other in the chat to exchange your own best teaching practices. Because I am presenting alone, I will not be monitoring the chat at this point, but I do look forward to a rich discussion with you during the question-answer session at the end of this presentation. My name is Christine Webster Hansen, and I am the Assistant Dean of eLearning, where I oversee over 200 online instructors, gaining insight into their best teaching practices. I've also been an English professor for over 20 years, during which time I've taught in online, traditional, and hybrid modalities. Today, I'll be presenting the benefits and challenges of asynchronous online discussions, and then, based on my own proven methods, I will provide solutions for how to create successful, engaging discourse in these forums, beginning with an explanation of the qualities of strong discussion prompts and rubrics. The focus of the presentation, though, will be on a case study of an American literature class that I recently taught, in which my approach to discussions before, during, and after each forum resulted in proven student learning and engagement. Careful to recognize, though, the unique needs of STEM courses, I will also provide some examples of rich interaction that I've observed in math and biology. And throughout the whole presentation, I will highlight how instructors of pre-designed master courses can engage students creatively, even when they've been asked to use a pre-built discussion prompt. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with the term, what is an asynchronous discussion? It's the way that it sounds. Rather than logging in simultaneously for a discussion that occurs during a live meeting, it happens in an online forum over a pre-established period of time. Students log in at their convenience as the discussion unfolds over several days, typically a week, and they reply to each other in message chains that the rest of the class can see, and all posts must be submitted by the due date. Okay, so first, the benefits. While most of us probably prefer live interaction, let's face it, we can offer asynchronous discussions in lieu of a live seminar to recognize that non-traditional students often have multiple jobs, families, and otherwise complicated schedules that make logging in at specified times challenging. Asynchronous learning formats can make education accessible for adults who might not otherwise have the option to earn a higher degree. They also allow students more time to actually reflect on what their classmates have contributed and reply in more meaningful ways. It also helps to get students who sit in the back of the classroom, so to speak, to participate, often with the confidence of semi-anonymity that the internet can bring. And discussions also provide practice with writing, which can prepare students for writing essays or research papers. So there are challenges that come with asynchronous discussions, though, such as how to create a discussion prompt that doesn't result in a fixed response, wherein there's only one correct answer and it's difficult to build on that. Well, this can be particularly difficult in math courses or language translation. But even when discussion prompts work, students often treat them as assignments. And those of us who teach asynchronously have seen this. So this is one of the main reasons why I'm here. We don't want students to negate the point of having a discussion, which is supposed to prompt critical dialogue and interaction. It's a problem when students submit all of their posts, including replies to classmates, on the same day at the beginning of the week, and then they never return to read their classmates' ideas. Or conversely, they wait until the end of the week to post everything, and then no one has time to reply to them, and they're losing something vital in the experience. So we can overcome these challenges, though, with the right discussion questions, the right rubric, and more importantly, strategic instructor engagement during all stages of discussions. It all starts with the right discussion prompt. When creating discussion questions, you really can't go wrong if you remain mindful of Bloom's taxonomy, aiming to require students to engage in all levels of cognitive processing, where as we ascend the pyramid, the levels of cognitive complexity increase as we guide students beyond recall and comprehension to the deeper processes of application, evaluation, and creation. Here's a good example from our Intro to Sociology class at Ocean. In this example, students are asked to design a supervised activity for an after-school program. As you can see in the underlined sentences, they must recall and comprehend the socialization theories that they've learned and evaluate them to select a program. Then they must analyze why certain learned theories contributed to their decision. Again, this is a great prompt. In this next excellent example from our general physics course, students must think of an object that follows a two-dimensional path and not only describe the scenario, but apply their understanding of physics concepts to explain when the acceleration vector is not aligned with the direction of travel, explain when the acceleration is the same or opposite the direction of travel, and then explain when it's at zero. And finally, they must create the ultimate Bloom skill, a sketch that shows the path of acceleration with labels for the direction of travel. This is ideal. Once you have a strong discussion question, you should create a rubric so that students know on what grounds their discussion posts will be evaluated and according to what point values. First, though, be sure to set clear start and end dates in the discussion's settings in your LMS. We want to avoid allowing students to post before the discussion begins or after it ends because they should be discussion participants, not assignment submitters. Rubrics should always require students to supply an initial post and then a response to at least 2 classmates to get them engaged in dialogue. Be sure to require the initial post by no more than a couple of days into the module so that when students reply, they have other students have the ability to read work that was posted early enough in the week. I'll explain why it's important to penalize for lateness. I'll get to that a little bit later in this presentation, but it's actually supportive to make sure that there is a penalty for that, for students that don't post initially on time. It's also important that we treat discussions as more than participation. I cannot stress this enough. We should be looking for evidence that students are thinking critically, organizing their thoughts, and incorporating information from the week's readings. Try to make sure that your rubric requires students to post across more than one day so that when they're replying to classmates, they've had time to read others' posts. And I will even recommend to you a little later on how to encourage this even when you've been asked to use a pre-designed rubric that doesn't specify the requirement of posting across 2 or more days. It's important that rubrics measure the students' ability to interact with each other in meaningful ways, that they're being asked to prompt each other with questions, that they're requesting clarity from each other, they're offering new perspectives, and essentially engaging in that rich dialogue. So now I'll explain or share with you the results of my case study in an American literature class that I taught last spring, in which my instructional efforts resulted in successful learning, activity, and interaction in the discussion boards. All forthcoming examples of interaction with and between students actually occurred. Okay, this is important. Before the term begins, I always email my class to set the standard for discussion interaction. I tell students that a good rule of professionalism is to respond to people who reply to their posts, even if they've already met the minimum number of required posts for the discussion per the rubric. And I tell them they should treat discussions not as assignments, but as robust academic dialogues, where they can exchange ideas among other growing scholars. Ignoring others, I say, is impolite, while acknowledging those who write to them will permit the growth of their academic networks and lead to their greater sense of fulfillment as students. Here I set the standard for discussions, and I treat students as active contributors of an academic community. And I also inform them that rewards do exist other than grades when they interact with each other through an exchange of ideas. Okay, the most important part of this process for instructors is to interact with as many students individually as possible. This is a best practice that instructors should follow up in their posts with additional questions that extend and develop the existing discussion prompt, even if it's one that was pre-built into the course. In this example, I asked a student whether she thought that Hemingway's language in the piece that we'd read had brought the war to life through onomatopoeia, which is a literary device. The original discussion did not prompt students about literary devices. But think about it, wouldn't a typical face-to-face classroom discussion include a diverse array of topics? It definitely would. So notice that she responds with specific examples of gunfire, bombs, and jets, which is her attempt to show that onomatopoeia, or words that sound like what they mean, exist in the piece. When instructors are there, students do respond, but we need to be there several times per week. If we visit the discussion too early in the week and check that box that we were there, but we don't return later, we won't be able to interact with students who've posted after we visited. And if we post too late in the module, then students who would have had the opportunity to come back and reply won't have that option, and they may not even come back that late to see that your posts are there. So it's important for us to be there regularly. Believe it or not, students do notice, and they benefit from their instructor's activity in the discussions. There was one day, this is a true story, when I accidentally replied to every one of my students in my American literature class except Cheryl. I had missed her post when I was scrolling. So literally within hours, only a few hours, she emailed me writing, "I'm concerned about Module 8. Do I not have a grasp of modernism? I see that you've posted a comment on everyone's initial post this morning except mine. Can you please give me feedback?" So I was rewarded by this very fulfilling message I received, because it showed me that my student was reading the discussions for my replies and actually seeing what I was saying to other people, which meant that she was learning. I immediately entered the discussion, of course, and I replied to her. I had 17 students in this section. So what do you do when you have 35 students, or you have several sections of 35 students? It can be unwieldy. I've been there, so I can absolutely relate. I would suggest that you make your work manageable and that you rotate the list of students who receive replies from you each week, so that over the course of the term, everyone receives an equal amount of posts from you. So for example, what you might want to attempt is maybe 2 posts per day, per module, per class, so that you have 10 posts by the end of the week per discussion. And that way you're not overwhelming yourself, but your students know you're there and they'll be coming back to look for your posts, and you're being fair and equitable. I also attempt in every module at least once to address the entire class in some way. In this abbreviated example, I define the term great spirit for my students because the footnotes in the reading had failed to do so. As you can see, Krista read the information and she expressed appreciation for it. So one thing you can do is define any unfamiliar terminology from the week, supply a historical context for what you're discussing, or maybe offer your own examples or analogies to clarify any challenging concepts the students might be witnessing. Discussions are also a great place for supplying links to supplemental resources. Give students a little extra information, a bio, some history. It's important to monitor the discussions as well so that they don't go astray. And sometimes these two things, supplying resources and monitoring for accuracy, go hand in hand. Here, Stephen mentions incorrectly that Native Americans are not American citizens. So I was alarmed and I quickly interjected to counter his assumption and supply a link to an explanation of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. It was nice to see that he did see my post, he responded and acknowledged the information I'd provided. It's situations like these that remind me of why it's so important for me to be there in the discussions daily to monitor for accuracy and make sure I'm not missing something of this nature. Okay, so the results of teacher modeling are gratifying. Notice in this example that Monica has learned that a useful interaction with a classmate is to ask questions to stimulate further thought. She asks Charlie, "Why do you think Faulkner has made a point to go out of time in the story?" And she asks whether he thinks this adds to the point regarding perspective in the literary style of this time period. Although Charlie had already responded to 2 other classmates and therefore met the requirements of the rubric, he took time to reply to Monica's post. And that's really exciting to see. Watch a community forum. In the example to the left, Carla suggests that Cheryl might enjoy watching the Broadway production of the play that we'd read. It was not necessary for her to supply this information. It wasn't an answer to the discussion prompt, but she did it willingly because she thought another student might benefit from the joy of watching this play just as she had. This is what we want, for our students to passionately share with each other new ideas, resources, and excitement for the subject matter. In the second example, you can see that Gwen has shared a link with Charlie because his statement in his post had reminded her of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which she had learned about in another course, and she thought he would benefit from the information. Very exciting. It's also important that your grading is intended to build stronger future discussions. So our choice to go beyond grading through a rubric is essential then. The rubric is important, but we want to ensure that we're not allowing students to simply post so they get participation points. Not to mention, a rubric can only go so far. We need to explain why students earned certain ratings on the point scale. This is where the individualized feedback is vital. We can talk about whether a post has a discernible main idea, whether it's supported properly by examples, whether students have incorporated quotes through the readings, and if not, where could they do so? These efforts absolutely impact the quality of upcoming posts. Something 7? Thank you. Okay, so also, even if your rubric doesn't require students to post on multiple days, you can still encourage it as long as you don't penalize when it doesn't happen that way. Here's an example of where I told Destiny in my grading feedback that she should try to post her replies to classmates a little later in the week so she can read more of their posts. And I explained that the point of the discussion is to learn from others. Look at the outcome of this effort. During the next module, she waited 4 days before replying to classmates after she supplied her initial post. As a result, she was exposed to a more diverse array of perspectives. So even though she was abiding by the rubric originally, she still learned and did better in the next module. Successful grading feedback should also guide the quality of students' replies to each other. Here I tell Desiree that she should brainstorm to get her classmates thinking, and perhaps she should offer an opposing perspective or ask a question to get them wondering about another point of view. Prior to my suggestion, every sentence of her posts to classmates began with phrases such as, "I enjoyed," "like you said," "I agree that." After my input, though, she began to promote critical thought in her classmates by asking, "Do you think?" and "How could?" This is a success story. Okay, so as much as it's tempting to quote unquote support students by not penalizing them, because we all care about our students, of course, believe it or not, on the contrary, we're doing a disservice to our students if we don't create boundaries that pull them into the discussion when it's happening. We can also make exceptions for students with extenuating circumstances, but in general, if they miss the discussion, then they're losing out on part of the experience if they're posting too early or too late and not seeing enough of their classmates' replies. Here's a comparison of 2 classes. On the left, the instructor was ignoring the part of the rubric that penalizes for lateness. And as a result, his students felt no incentive to supply their initial posts on time in subsequent modules. By the final discussion, this didn't improve much, and there weren't that many. There was still a large number of students that were posting late in the discussion, and 3 of them posted so late they received no replies from classmates. On the right, you can see the results of my approach, which may at first seem harsh because I do deduct points for late initial posts, but as you can see, the students actually benefited. By the end of the term, 0 students were posting late in the discussions, and they were actively engaging throughout the entire week. Now I'd like to share the results that I collected from my students' participation in my American Literature course. This scatter plot shows not the total posting count for each student per discussion, but the average number of replies that they posted to each other after their initial posts. During the first week in the term, most students supplied the obligatory 2 replies to classmates, but by the end, the average was 3.5. This is because a number of students were replying to up to 3, 4, 5, and even 6 classmates. This is all documented. Despite that the rubric required only 2 replies, the upward trend line shows that students became more engaged as the term progressed, and none of this would have happened if my students thought I didn't care or if I wasn't in the discussions and holding them to a high standard, treating them like scholars. Now, I know that we are pressed for time, so I apologize for skipping the mathematics example. I'm going to go to biology, but we definitely have many success stories in our STEM courses. It's possible to apply these methods to STEM. So in this example, our professor, Dana Newton, asks her student a follow-up question to his post about genetically engineered crops. He writes that one fear people have of GMOs is that pesticide-resistant crops can lead to a decrease in one pest and an increase in others, which can negatively impact the ecosystem. The instructor extends the discussion beyond the original prompt, saying, another thought is that Roundup-ready varieties are also sterile. And what does that mean for the farmer? She asks. He responds thoughtfully. Again, he doesn't have to. This wasn't part of his 2 replies. He says that farmers would need to buy new seed every year, and the seed company can set the price. In the end, the instructor has assisted with bringing ethics and economics into a discussion about biology, and the student has risen to the occasion. So remember that what we do as instructors before, during, and after a discussion will impact learning and success in these asynchronous discussions. Remember to set expectations early on, engage with students individually and as a whole, frequently, as much as possible, and ask those follow-up questions, post links and resources, and grade for critical thoughts. So at this point, I will start a question answer session, and I don't know if I'll have access beyond the chat, but I'll certainly be looking there if anyone wants to follow up and inquire. But I do thank you all for attending, and I hope you found some nugget that you could take with you into your own classes.